My sister refused to call 911 when I had severe chest pain, telling me to stop overreacting. I hit the floor while my family watched. They all thought I'd been cut off at the will reading. But then the ER doctor walked in, placed a hand on my sister's shoulder, and said 6 words that shattered the entire room. The pain started slowly, a dull pressure in my chest that I tried to ignore. I'd been stressed lately, who wasn't? The pressure from work. The worry about my aging father, the constant weight of expectations from a family that never seemed to see me. But that morning, as I walked into the living room of my parents' house for the will reading, the sensation in my chest worsened. I tried to brush it off, but it was like a stone pressing down on my heart, squeezing tighter with each breath. I felt dizzy, my vision starting to blur. The room felt suddenly too hot, stifling, the air thick with tension. I could hear the murmurs of my relatives, the low hum of their idle chatter, as they gathered around. They were all here for the will reading. Everyone was waiting for their piece of the inheritance. Everyone except me. I reached out for my sister, Laura. She was standing near the front, her posture perfect, looking every bit the dutiful daughter, as she greeted family members. I could feel my legs weakening, my body betraying me in front of all these people. "Laura," I whispered, my voice barely a breath, "call 911." She turned to me with a cold expression. Her eyes flicked over my face with that same, all too familiar disdain. She didn't care. "Stop overreacting," she snapped. "You're doing this for attention. We all know you've been cut out of the will." My hands were trembling, my fingers desperate for something to steady myself. I reached for my phone on the side table, trying to call for help, but before I could grab it, Laura was there. She swiped it from my hand, slammed it face down on the table, and turned back to the others. My body couldn't take it anymore. My legs buckled, sending me crashing to the hardwood floor. I didn't have the strength to hold myself up. The cold wood pressed against my cheek as I collapsed, gasping for air, struggling to breathe. The room was spinning, and the pain, it was like a vice, squeezing the life out of me. "Mom, please," I whispered, my voice so weak now. I could barely hear myself over the pounding in my ears. "Help me." But my mother just stood there. I saw her, across the room, her gaze frozen, locked on Laura. She looked at me, then back at Laura, as though waiting for permission. And then, in that moment, I realized, she wasn't going to help me. She wasn't going to do anything. Not because she didn't love me, but because she had spent years choosing Laura. Laura, the perfect daughter. The one who always got the praise, the one who could do no wrong. For a second, I thought I might pass out from the pain. My chest felt like it was caving in, the air around me thinning. I could hear my heart thudding, irregular and weak. I felt myself slipping away, like I was being pulled into a dark void. And as I lay there, waiting for someone, anyone to notice, I realized no one would. Not my mother, not my relatives, not even Laura. I thought about my father in his final days, how I had been there for him, when no one else was. How I had stayed up late reading to him. How I'd given up my time to care for him, even when it hurt. And now, here I was, lying on the floor, ignored by the very people I had tried so hard to please. But just as the world started to go dark, just as I felt like I was fading away, I heard something. A voice. It wasn't from any of my family. It was a stranger's voice. She's in cardiac distress. How long has she been down? Why wasn't 911 called immediately? I opened my eyes, just a sliver, and saw a man standing over me. He wasn't family. He was an emergency room doctor. But how? How had he gotten here? And then I saw her. Mrs. Eleanor. My father's neighbor, standing in the doorway, her face filled with fury. She had seen everything. She had seen Laura take my phone. She had heard Laura tell my mother not to call for help. And she had made sure that someone would. In that moment, with Mrs. Eleanor's voice cutting through the chaos, I knew I wasn't completely alone. Not anymore. After the doctor arrived, everything seemed to slow down. I was still lying on the floor, gasping for air, my body trembling. But as the paramedics rushed in, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Mrs. Eleanor had done it. She had called for help. The doctors and paramedics worked quickly, checking my vitals, their voices calm but urgent. Their hands were warm as they touched me, and for the first time that day, I felt a sense of care from someone. Not from my family, but from strangers who were doing their best to save my life. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, I could barely keep my eyes open. Everything felt heavy, my chest, my limbs, my heart. I tried to focus, but it was hard to stay conscious. I had no idea how much time passed, but when I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The beeping of the heart monitor was steady, and the sterile smell of the room hit me all at once. I blinked, trying to adjust to the bright lights. It took a moment for everything to come into focus. The doctor who had been with me was sitting beside my bed, looking at my chart. His expression was calm, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. "You're awake," he said, his voice kind but firm. "How are you feeling?" I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry, and the words wouldn't come. I nodded, trying to show that I understood, but my mind was still foggy. He gave me a reassuring smile and leaned forward slightly. "You've had a rough few days," he said gently. "Your heart was under a lot of stress, too much for your body to handle, and it almost stopped. But we caught it just in time." I could barely process his words. My body felt heavy, like it didn't belong to me anymore. The pain was still there, lurking in the background, but it wasn't the physical kind. It was something deeper, something I couldn't name. "Your sister was the one who caused the delay," the doctor continued. "She didn't want to call for help when you were in distress. She told your mother not to, said you were faking it. But Mrs. Eleanor, your neighbor, heard everything and stepped in. If she hadn't, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now." I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My sister, Laura, hadn't just ignored me. She had actively stopped anyone from helping. She had made sure that I didn't get the care I needed when I was at my most vulnerable. The doctor didn't mince words. "We have a witness." Mrs. Eleanor gave a full statement about what happened. My chest tightened again, not from the physical pain, but from the overwhelming sense of betrayal. I closed my eyes, trying to calm myself, but it was hard to breathe. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. My family had stood there while I nearly died. The doctor didn't seem to notice my distress. He kept talking about my condition, the care I would need in the days to come. But his words were just noise in the background. All I could hear was the image of my mother, standing there, doing nothing while Laura dismissed me. All the years of being invisible, of giving everything and getting nothing in return, suddenly hit me like a wave. I had been a fool. I had spent my whole life believing that if I just kept doing what was expected, if I just kept loving and sacrificing, they would see me, but they never did. Not really. Not until it was too late. The doctor left me alone for a while, giving me time to process. But as the minutes passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no closer to understanding what had happened. How could they have done this to me? How could my own family, my mother, my sister, let me fall so far? I tried to sleep, but the thoughts kept swirling in my head. All the things I had sacrificed for them, all the things I had done without asking for anything in return. And what did I get? Rejection. Betrayal. A family that wouldn't even pick up the phone when I was dying. It wasn't until hours later, when the nurse came in to check on me, that I realized how exhausted I was. I hadn't allowed myself to stop, not in so long. I hadn't let myself feel what I was really going through. All the pain, all the resentment, had been buried deep down, and now it was all rising to the surface. I needed to be alone. I needed space to think, to figure out what came next. But deep down, I knew what needed to happen. It wasn't just about the pain I felt in my chest, or the betrayal I'd just endured. It was about something bigger. Something I'd been avoiding for far too long. I had spent my life giving my heart to people who didn't care about it, and I was done. The next few days were a blur. I slowly regained my strength, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had changed. I had almost died in that room, surrounded by people who claimed to love me, and I didn't know how to process it. My body was healing, but my heart, that was still a different story. When I was finally strong enough to leave the hospital, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back to the way things were. I wasn't going to let my family continue to treat me like this. And I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. The days that followed were a blur of hospital rooms, doctors, and nurses. But nothing could shake the feeling that my life had somehow shifted. I wasn't sure what exactly had changed, but I knew I was no longer the same person I had been when I walked into that house just days ago. The pain in my chest had faded, but the weight in my heart remained. I couldn't forget the look on my mother's face as she stood there, frozen, while Laura dismissed me. I had spent my life trying to earn her approval, trying to be the daughter she could be proud of, but it had always been in vain. I had never been enough for her. And as much as I tried to focus on my recovery, I couldn't shake the anger that simmered beneath the surface. The betrayal cut deeper than anything physical. Laura had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my mother's eyes. It wasn't just the will reading. It was the years of being overlooked, the countless times I had sacrificed my own needs for the sake of others, and received nothing in return. But the anger wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the feeling of being invisible. The feeling that no matter what I did, no matter how much I gave, it would never matter to the people who were supposed to love me. I spent hours in my hospital room, staring at the white walls, trying to make sense of everything. It felt like my entire life had been built on a foundation of lies. My father had always seen me, always understood the sacrifices I made. But he was gone now. And my mother. She had chosen Laura over and over, time and time again, without question, without hesitation. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me wanted to forgive her. Part of me wanted to believe that she had just been manipulated by Laura, that she wasn't fully to blame. But the other part of me, the part that had been hurt the most, knew that she had made those choices willingly. She had allowed me to be invisible for my entire life. And now I was paying the price. But there was something else, something I couldn't ignore, something that I had never allowed myself to feel before. I was angry, yes, but I was also relieved. Relieved that I had finally seen the truth. I didn't have to keep pretending anymore. I didn't have to keep trying to earn approval from people who would never truly see me. As the days passed, I started to reflect more on the past. I thought about my childhood, how I had always been the responsible one, the one who took care of everything. I had always been the one to step in when things went wrong, to clean up the messes, to make sure everyone else was okay. And yet, I was the one who was ignored, the one who was forgotten. But that was changing. I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. The day I was discharged from the hospital, I could hardly contain the thoughts swirling in my mind. It felt like I was walking out of a fog. Like I had finally cleared away the mental and emotional clutter that had kept me trapped for so long. I had survived. I had faced my worst fear. And I had come out on the other side. But as much as I wanted to leave it all behind, I knew that wasn't the end. My family hadn't seen the last of me. I wasn't going to let them continue to treat me this way. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. But more than that, I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. I wasn't going to let Laura's lies or my mother's neglect take away my sense of worth. I was stronger than that. And I was going to prove it. But first, I had to face them. I had to face the family who had spent so long ignoring me, who had allowed Laura to take center stage while I quietly slipped into the background. And I had to make them see me. I had to make them understand that I was not the person they had dismissed all these years. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I had no choice. I had already let them break me once. I wouldn't let them do it again. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was mine to take. And for the first time in my life, I felt ready. Ready to take back what was mine. Ready to stop hiding. Ready to stop being invisible. Because I wasn't invisible anymore. I had finally been seen. When I finally got home from the hospital, it felt like stepping into a different world. My apartment, the place that had always been a refuge for me, now felt like a cage. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker, and everything that had once felt comfortable now felt too quiet, too still. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to feel relieved or angry, or both. The truth was, I wasn't sure of much anymore. I had survived, yes. I had made it through the pain, the betrayal, the crushing loneliness. But as I sat there on the edge of my bed, I couldn't help but think about what it all meant. What did it mean to survive, when no one cared enough to help? What did it mean to be alive, when you weren't even seen by the people who were supposed to love you? It wasn't until I got the call from the lawyer that things started to feel like they were moving forward. My father's will had been read, but I wasn't prepared for the emotional storm that would follow. The lawyer had scheduled an appointment to meet with me and discuss my father's final wishes. I had put it off for days, unsure if I was ready to face what was coming, but I knew I had to. As I made my way to the lawyer's office, my mind raced. What had my father left for me? What did he want me to do with his inheritance? Would it even matter? I hadn't seen him in so long. He was barely a shadow of the man I remembered. The last few months of his life had been a blur of hospital visits and medication, and all I had done was try to keep it together for him. But in the end, he was gone. And I was still here, facing a world that had never really seen me. I arrived at the lawyer's office, my heart pounding in my chest. The building felt cold, sterile, like a place where emotions were meant to be left outside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something that would change my life forever. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with graying hair, greeted me with a stiff handshake and a polite smile. "Stella, thank you for coming in today," he said, leading me into a small conference room. "I know this hasn't been easy for you, but your father was very clear about his wishes." As he spoke, I could feel the weight of his words settling on my shoulders. I had been preparing myself for this moment for so long, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. "I have something for you," the lawyer said, pulling out a manila envelope from his desk. "Your father made some very specific arrangements, and I think it's important that you see this before anyone else." He slid the envelope across the table toward me. My hands were trembling as I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the paper. I felt like I was holding my father's legacy in my hands, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. Inside the envelope was a letter, written in my father's shaky handwriting. The words were simple, but they carried a weight I wasn't prepared for. "Stella," the letter began, "I know I haven't always shown it, but I want you to know that I see you. I see everything you've done for me, even when others didn't. You have always been the one to take care of me, and I regret that I never acknowledged it the way I should have. You deserve more than I've given you, and I'm sorry for that." My eyes blurred with tears as I read his words. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not by my mother, not by Laura, but by my father, the one person who had always understood me. "I've made sure that my will reflects this." The letter continued. "I want you to have everything you deserve. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You are my daughter, and I am proud of you." The tears came faster now. I had never expected this. I had never expected to hear my father's approval, let alone his apology. I had spent my whole life trying to earn his love, but in the end, he had given it to me freely, without conditions. And that was something I had never allowed myself to hope for. The lawyer was watching me closely, his expression unreadable. He waited until I had finished reading the letter before he spoke again. "Your father made it very clear that he wanted to protect you," he said quietly. "I knew about the issues with your sister, and he wanted to make sure that his final wishes were respected. There's more to this will than just the inheritance, Stella. Your father left specific instructions for your protection, both financially and emotionally." I looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" The lawyer hesitated for a moment before continuing. There's a clause in your father's will that directly addresses your sister's actions. He was aware of the situation at the will reading, and he had already taken steps to ensure that your sister couldn't contest the will. I could hardly process what he was saying. My father had known. He had known about everything, about Laura's lies, about her manipulations, and he had done something about it. My mind raced, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, my father had been fighting for me all along, even when I thought he had abandoned me. The lawyer handed me another document. A detailed statement from Mrs. Eleanor, confirming the events of that day. The very same woman who had called for help when no one else would. She had seen everything, and now, her testimony was part of the legal record. It was all documented. I sat back in my chair, stunned. My father had known. He had known the truth, and he had made sure that I was protected, even after his death. And just like that, a weight began to lift off my chest. It wasn't just about the inheritance. It wasn't about the money, or the house, or any of the things that had once seemed so important. It was about the fact that my father had seen me. He had always seen me, even when I didn't see myself. "I'll be in touch soon," the lawyer said, standing up. "There's more to discuss, but for now, take your time with this." I nodded, still in shock. As I left the office, I felt like I was walking through a fog, unsure of where I was going, but knowing that something had shifted inside me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't invisible anymore. I had been seen, and that changed everything. I had always thought my father's love for me was conditional, dependent on how much I gave, how much I sacrificed. But now, after everything had happened, I was learning that his love had never been in question. He had seen me all along, even when I couldn't see myself. The realization settled deep inside me, like a comforting warmth. The letter he left behind had changed everything. For years, I had fought to earn his approval, only to feel overlooked by him and the rest of the family. But now, it wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about something more, something that had been buried beneath all the years of neglect and silence. My father had fought for me. Even in his last days, when he could barely speak, he had been working behind the scenes to make sure I was taken care of. But it wasn't just the letter that made everything different. It was the knowledge that he had truly understood me. I wasn't just a daughter who cared for him when no one else would. I wasn't just someone who took care of everything, quietly accepting the neglect and silence. I was his daughter, and he loved me for who I was, not for what I could do for him. I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the letter in my hands, feeling its weight like a lifeline. It was a lifeline to the past, to a man who had always seen me, always understood me, even when I couldn't understand myself. I had never allowed myself to believe that I was worthy of love without strings attached. But now, I had proof. Proof that my father had seen me, even when no one else had. As I looked down at the letter, a thought struck me. He had known. He had known about Laura's lies, her manipulations, the way she had always taken center stage, while I quietly faded into the background. And yet, he had never said a word. He had never confronted Laura. Instead, he had chosen to protect me in the only way he knew how, by making sure that his final wishes would be respected. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me was grateful that he had done it, that he had fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. But part of me also felt betrayed. Why hadn't he told me? Why hadn't he made his plans known while he was still alive? Why had he waited until the end to protect me? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that it didn't matter. What mattered was that he had made sure I was taken care of. He had seen the truth, and in the end, he had made sure that no one could take away what was rightfully mine. I placed the letter carefully on the table and stood up, feeling a new sense of purpose rising within me. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a chance to start over. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't just the daughter who had been overlooked. I was the daughter who had been loved, even in the darkest moments. But there was still one thing left to do. I had to confront Laura. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. The thought of facing her again, after everything that had happened, made my stomach churn. But I knew I had to. I couldn't keep letting her control me. Couldn't keep letting her manipulate me into silence. I had spent too long allowing her to take everything from me, and it was time for that to end. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. I wasn't sure what I was going to say to her, but I knew that whatever happened next, it would be the start of something new. A new life. A life where I no longer allowed myself to be treated as invisible. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Her voice was cold, distant, as usual. "Hello," Laura said, her tone sharp. "Laura," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "I need to talk to you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out what I wanted. "I don't think there's anything left to say," Laura replied, her voice laced with annoyance. "What is it now?" I could feel the anger rising inside me, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't about getting revenge. This was about setting boundaries. "I'm not going to let you do this anymore," I said, my voice firmer now. "I'm not going to let you keep taking everything from me. I'm done being your scapegoat. Done being the one who has to clean up your messes." There was a moment of silence, and then Laura laughed, a bitter, mocking sound. "Oh, please. You think this is all about you?" I didn't flinch. "It's always been about me, Laura. You've been taking everything from me for years. But it ends now. I'm setting boundaries, and I'm not going to let you walk all over me anymore." I could feel the tension on the other end of the line, but I refused to back down. "You're going to therapy," I said, my words clear and unwavering. "You're going to work through this. And you're going to sign a statement, admitting what you did. All of it. The lies. The manipulation. The way you tried to ruin me." Laura didn't respond right away, but I could hear her breathing heavy, her rage building. I knew she was trying to figure out what to say, how to twist the situation in her favor. But I wasn't going to let her. "This isn't about forgiveness, Laura," I continued, my voice steady. "It's about responsibility. You're going to take responsibility for what you've done. And you're never going to contact me again, unless I reach out first. If you break that, everything goes public. Everything. The forgery. The hospital records. Mrs. Eleanor's statement. All of it." There was another long pause, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low. Furious. "You think this is fair?" after everything we've been through. You're just going to throw me away. I took a deep breath. Yes, I am. Because I've spent my whole life being invisible to you. But I'm not invisible anymore. And you can't control me anymore. The line went silent, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I wasn't going to let her take anything else from me. I wasn't going to let anyone take anything from me. I had taken my power back. And it felt damn good. The days that followed my confrontation with Laura were a blur of anticipation and unease. I had drawn a line in the sand, set my boundaries, but the silence that followed felt deafening. Laura hadn't tried to reach out to me, which both relieved and unnerved me. I had expected her to fight back, to deny everything, to continue manipulating me like she always had. But she didn't. Instead, there was just an uncomfortable stillness, a tension hanging in the air between us. I didn't know if I was ready for what was coming, but I knew I couldn't keep running from it. There was no turning back now. It was time to face the fallout. A few days after the phone call, I received a letter from the lawyer. He'd arranged for a meeting with the family to go over the final terms of the will, and I was to be there. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about making sure my father's wishes were respected, and, in a way, it was about taking back my life. I had no idea what to expect from the others, but I knew I couldn't let them intimidate me. The lawyer's office was cold, professional, and the kind of place where things happened without emotion. When I walked in, I found my family already sitting there. My mother, my aunt, my cousin. But Laura wasn't there yet. I wasn't sure if that was a relief, or if it just meant she was preparing herself for the confrontation. As I sat down across from them, I could feel their eyes on me. The silence was heavy, like they were all waiting for me to break. But I didn't. I kept my gaze steady, not letting any of their discomfort rattle me. "Thank you for joining us," the lawyer said as he came into the room, holding a folder in his hands. "I know this has been a difficult time for everyone, but your father was very clear in his wishes. It's important we finalize everything today." There was a quiet murmur around the room, but no one spoke up. They all seemed to be waiting for the moment to come. The moment when my father's estate would be divided. For some reason, it felt like they were all expecting me to cave, to give in to the pressure. But I wasn't the same person who had walked into that living room months ago. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. The lawyer cleared his throat and opened the folder, taking out a stack of papers. He looked directly at me, and then, as if he were preparing to make a grand announcement, he said, "Your father made some changes to his will that will be important to discuss." I glanced around the room, noticing the subtle shift in the way my family was sitting. Everyone seemed tense. They had no idea what was coming, and for the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't care what they thought. "Stella," the lawyer continued, his voice calm but serious, "your father left the majority of his estate to you." I heard the collective gasp from my relatives, and for a moment, I felt a surge of something I hadn't expected, satisfaction. Not because of the money, not because of the house or the investments, but because for once, my father had seen me. And now they would too. My mother's face flushed with shock. My aunt shifted in her chair, and I could see her glance at Laura's empty seat. The lawyer continued, unaffected by the reactions around him. The majority of the assets will be transferred to you, as well as your father's personal belongings, and the house. Wait. My mother finally spoke up, her voice shaking. What do you mean the majority? What about Laura? The lawyer paused before responding. Laura, and your mother will receive the legally required minimum, but nothing more. I couldn't help but notice the disbelief in my mother's eyes. I had spent my whole life feeling like the second choice, the backup plan, the one who was never enough. But here, in this room, I was enough. And it was as if the years of feeling overlooked, the years of being invisible, had finally been erased. My mother opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the door opened. Laura stepped inside, her face painted with the same expression she always wore. The confident, unshakable mask of someone who had never been challenged. She walked toward the chair beside my mother, her eyes scanning the room, and then, finally, settled on me. I'm here now, she said, as if she owned the room. She hadn't even looked at me, but I could feel her anger radiating off of her. So, what's going on? Did the lawyer already read the will? The lawyer nodded, giving her a calm but pointed look. Yes, Laura. We were just about to go over the details of your father's final wishes. Right. Laura said, her tone dismissive. Let's get this over with. It's not like it matters anyway. Her words were meant to provoke, to put me in my place, to remind everyone that she was the golden child. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I wasn't going to shrink back. Not anymore. Actually, it does matter, I said, my voice firm and clear. It matters because for the first time in my life, my father did what was right. He saw me. And now, it's time for everyone else to do the same. The room went silent, and for a moment, I thought I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. But I didn't let that stop me. This was my moment. The moment I had waited for my entire life. Laura's face twisted in disbelief, but I wasn't finished. My father left me everything. Everything. Not because I'm his favorite, but because I earned it. And I won't let anyone, least of all you, take that away from me. Laura's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. You think you deserve this. You think you've earned it. I do, I said. And it's time you learn to accept that. The lawyer spoke again, his voice calm, but there was a subtle firmness to it. A's for the rest of the will. There is additional documentation that your father had prepared in case anyone contested his wishes. That includes legal proof of your actions, Laura, including the forged documents and statements from witnesses. Laura's expression faltered for just a moment before she quickly recovered. This is insane, she spat. He wasn't in his right mind when he signed that. The lawyer didn't flinch. Actually, he was. And everything is legally binding. The weight of the moment settled in the room, thick with the truth that Laura had been hiding for so long. She had always thought she was untouchable, but now, the truth was coming to light, and it wasn't going to be easy to deny. I sat back, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't about the money. This wasn't about anything material. This was about taking my place, about standing up for myself, and about making sure that I was never again invisible. The room was heavy with tension. Laura's disbelief was palpable as she sat there, staring at the lawyer, her mind racing for a way out of this. but there was no escaping the truth. Everything had been laid out, every lie exposed, and the weight of it was sinking in. For the first time, Laura seemed unsure of herself. She shifted in her chair, glancing around at the relatives who were present, expecting them to back her up. But no one spoke. No one came to her defense. I felt a sense of satisfaction, but it wasn't the kind I had expected. This wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about rubbing her face in it. It was about reclaiming my place, about proving that I was worth something. Not to Laura, not to my mother, but to myself. I had spent so long trying to please them, to make them see me, but I realized, now that their validation didn't matter. What mattered was that I saw myself. The lawyer continued, his voice calm and professional. As I mentioned earlier, we also have statements from witnesses, including Mrs. Eleanor, who was there the day of your collapse, Stella. She witnessed your sister's actions firsthand. Everything is documented. I could feel Laura's gaze burning into me, but I refused to look away. She had spent years undermining me, erasing my contributions, and telling lies. It was time for her to face the consequences. It was time for her to realize that I wasn't the weak, invisible sister she thought I was. You're going to pay for this, Laura said suddenly, her voice low but cold. You really think this will just go away? You think people are going to take your side? You're just as much of a liar as I am. Just wait until everyone knows the truth about you. Her words stung, but they didn't have the same power they once would have. I had spent so long caring about what she thought, but not anymore. No, Laura. The truth is, I've spent my entire life trying to make you happy, trying to get you to see me, but I'm done. I'm not playing your game anymore. You're not going to control me. You're not going to make me feel small anymore. I watched as her expression shifted, the arrogance slowly slipping away, replaced by something darker. She looked furious, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. She had never been confronted like this before. No one had ever stood up to her. Not like this. The lawyer glanced between us, his expression unreadable. Before he turned his attention back to the papers in front of him. Stella, he said, his tone suddenly serious. Your father had one more request, one more thing he wanted to make sure was clear. In the event that there was any interference or dispute over his will, he instructed that all relevant documents be handed over to law enforcement. This includes evidence of the forgery and witness statements about the incident with your sister. Laura's face went pale at the mention of law enforcement, and I could see the realization dawn on her. She was no longer in control of this situation. She had lost, and there was nothing she could do to take it back. I didn't mean to. Laura started, her voice wavering as she tried to backpedal, to somehow explain away her actions. But the damage was done. No amount of denial would undo what had already been exposed. You meant to, I said quietly, cutting her off. You did all of this on purpose, and now you have to live with it. The lawyer continued reading through the will, but I could hardly hear his words. My focus was on Laura, watching her unravel in front of me. This was it. The moment I had spent years waiting for. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I wasn't going to let her get away with what she had done. The silence that followed was suffocating. Everyone was waiting for Laura to say something, to defend herself, But all she could do was sit there. Her face drained of color. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She had no words left. Finally, the lawyer spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension. "Stella, as your father's will is now final, I will ensure all the necessary steps are taken to transfer the assets and ensure everything is in order." I nodded, not fully processing the details. I wasn't concerned about the money or the house. I didn't care about the material things. What mattered to me now was that I had stood up for myself. I had finally taken control of my life. I had finally stopped being the person I thought everyone wanted me to be. And that was the greatest victory of all. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, I couldn't shake the feeling of relief that washed over me. It was over. For the first time in my life, I was free. Free from the expectations of my family, free from the lies and manipulation, and I was ready to move forward. But there was one more thing I needed to do. One more person I had to face. I called my mother later that night, after everything had settled. The silence between us was thick, heavy with the years of tension and hurt. "Stella," she said, her voice soft and uncertain, I don't know what to say. I failed you. I've always failed you." I swallowed hard, fighting the tears that threatened to rise. "I don't need your apology, Mom. I don't need you to make up for the years you ignored me. I just need you to understand that I'm not the person you've always made me out to be." "I know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I've always been so blind. And I see now. I see what I did. And I'm sorry." I paused, trying to find the words. "I'm not ready to forgive you, Mom. I don't know if I ever will be. But I'm not closing the door on you. Not yet." There was a long silence, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't about forgiveness, not yet. But it was about possibility. A chance for something different, something better. And for the first time, I felt like I might just deserve it. As I hung up the phone, I realized that this was just the beginning. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for it. I was ready to rebuild my life, on my own terms. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The days that followed my meeting with the lawyer felt like a quiet storm had passed. I was still processing everything. What my father had left behind, what had been revealed, what had been lost, but there was also a sense of peace beginning to settle in. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had control. Control over my story, over my future. I had spent so many years being invisible to my family, trying to earn their love, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. But I wasn't that person anymore. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I had survived a betrayal that had nearly cost me my life, and I had emerged stronger, more certain of who I was than I ever been before. A few weeks after the will reading, I received a letter from Laura. The handwriting was unmistakable, even though it looked like it had been written in haste. The letter was long, too long, and filled with justifications, memories from our childhood, and pleas for forgiveness. At first, I thought about throwing it away, not even bothering to read it. I knew what was inside. More manipulation, more blame. But something inside me stopped me. I had to know. I had to understand where this was coming from. I opened the envelope and began reading. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an acknowledgement of the damage she had done. It was, instead, a carefully crafted narrative of how hard her life had been, how much she had suffered, how difficult it had been to live up to expectations. There was no real recognition of her actions, no genuine regret. Just more of the same old story she had been telling herself for years. By the time I finished the letter, I was more resolute than ever. Laura wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to suddenly see the damage she had caused, not without doing the hard work to confront her own demons. And frankly, I wasn't waiting around for her to do that. I had my own life to live now. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer beside my father's last note. It was enough. I didn't need Laura's explanations or justifications. I didn't need her forgiveness, either. What I needed was peace, and I was starting to find it, piece by piece. A few days later, I went to visit Mrs. Eleanor. She had been such a steady presence in my life, the one person who had always seen me, who had always believed in me. She had saved my life that day, and I would never forget it. When I arrived at her house, she greeted me with a warm hug, her hands steady but gentle on my shoulders. "How are you, dear?" she asked, her voice as kind as ever. "I'm better," I said, feeling the truth of those words for the first time in a long while. "A lot better, actually." We sat down on her porch, sipping iced tea as the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time, I felt like I could just breathe. "You know," Mrs. Eleanor said after a while, "your father would be so proud of you. He saw what was happening, and he did everything he could to protect you. Even after he was gone, he made sure you would be okay." I nodded, the weight of her words settling in. It had taken me so long to realize that my father had always seen me. He had always known the truth, even when I hadn't fully understood it myself. And now, with everything that had happened, I could finally understand him too. "You're stronger than you think, Stella," she continued, her eyes kind and knowing. "You've always been strong, but now you know it. You don't need anyone else to validate that." I felt a lump form in my throat as her words hit home. For so long, I had been seeking approval from people who would never give it. I had spent my life trying to prove my worth, but in the end, the only person I needed to prove it to was myself. "I've been learning that," I said quietly. "It's hard, but I'm getting there." Mrs. Eleanor smiled, a small, knowing smile. "You've come a long way, dear. And you'll keep going. You have your father's strength inside you. I can see it in you." I smiled back, feeling a deep sense of gratitude wash over me. "Thank you, Mrs. Eleanor, for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." "You're welcome, Stella," she replied gently. "Just remember, you're never truly alone. There are people who see you, who care about you. You just have to let them in." Her words stayed with me long after I left her house. As I walked back to my apartment, I realized that I was beginning to understand what it meant to let people in. To let love in. And most importantly, to let myself believe that I was worthy of it. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. Lighter. The darkness that had hung over me for so long was starting to lift, and I could see a new path ahead. A path that was mine to walk, one step at a time. I had spent too many years hiding, too many years thinking I wasn't enough. But I had always been enough. And now, I was finally ready to live for myself, To stop seeking validation from people who could never give it to me. I wasn't invisible anymore. I had been seen, and I had seen myself for the first time in years. I was ready for what came next. I stood in front of the mirror that morning, looking at the woman I had become. And for the first time, I smiled, not because I was trying to please anyone, but because I had finally learned to love the person I saw staring back at me. I had my father's strength, I had Mrs. Eleanor's wisdom, and I had my own courage. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was mine, and that was enough.